Hello and welcome back. My name's Brandon. I thought I'd work on... Gotta get my wave in there. Also, that's a ping. Wonder why that's happening. Thought I'd work some more on my Tube-nado project. Mighty pleased with the progress so far. I might end up slowing down as I figure out some kinks and techniques to help widen it, as well as I'll be using this to get over there, as well as a delay in verticality due to it getting wider and wider. And safe touchdown. Definitely having a view distance, if that's a term. Registering physical entities. Can sort of see something of the foundations, but can't see the full foundation until a certain point. So I wonder what that's going to look like later on. Landed on the exact opposite side, didn't look ahead to see where I should land, but that's no problem at all. I think Irish accents are one of the most fun to do. Apologies. Gonna make sure my timer's up and ready. At 1 hour, 36 minutes and 10 seconds, and resume. Alright, I now remember what's causing that. That's when you alt-tab. Tips and tricks with Brandon. When you tab back in, alt-tab out of the game and back into the game, it recognizes holding alt. This is all intentional. Pinging right here. As you can tell, I didn't... hopefully didn't seem like I tabbed out of the game, which... if you trust my word on it, I didn't. But holding alt and clicking will put a ping on the map, which, testing it out, doesn't do it at great distances. Maybe it's a threshold of 700 meters. And that should show up on the map as pings. Very nice element to the game. Hard to make use of if it's just yourself here. Oh, sad, lonely days. Had a panic attack there that my mic was muted, which would make this video woefully sad if I hadn't realized 3 minutes in. Just looking for things to talk about. I guess I can look at the planets. Now that I see it, the dark side shows the molten canyons in it. Wonder if we can see some slight outline of that galaxy. That'd be nice to see. Not getting my hopes up too much for that though. It's like fireworks during the day. Already I feel like this video is a bit more loose verbally. I suppose that can also lead into how loosely I want to represent my ideas for this Tubenado, because I could go infinitely, making it a perfect cone. But I kind of want to see it flare out on the top, gathering winds and creating mass. Or gathering mass. Gathering winds, gathering mass. Guess I can use the same word twice. But I would like to figure out some way to... went the wrong direction on cycling through, or overstepped. I don't have any rods on me. I think it should visually show, so I don't know if I'm able to place belt foundation on tube foundation, or tubes. Try to remember to test that on one of my trips down. And it doesn't seem like we're likely to run out with my resources as is, but that also depends on the pace I get placing. So I would like to figure out some way to widen out the top. Hopefully I get a algebraic, or geometric idea of what I want it to look like quickly as it goes, though that will be hard to represent. That might look chunky. So it's definitely a tough call if I want to do some mathematical element of trying to widen it out versus just continuing as is, gradually making it wider and wider at the same rate, eventually doing a split. I don't know if we can even see that split before, because I can see spiderweb lines. That's actually a nice visual. Also gives me an idea of what I might try to create. So one moment as I write down one of my possible new ideas. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Spider tube, question mark? I wonder if it will lead to some interesting designs, or obviously complications and things overlapping. Wonder if it will get mad at me for too many entities in the same spot, which I imagine a spider web by design with physical entities that already have some warning of you're clipping too many things. I guess that would be an opportunity to test the extremes of the game. So far though, it's pretty nice that even with this large entity and also a significant amount of a single line of entities encompassing the map, the game's still running pretty smoothly. Maybe I just haven't been overburdening it. I probably have a mediocre factory compared to what could be presented or strained on the game. That, but also maybe each update they are just fleshing out the view range challenges. Sometimes when I start a sentence, it sounds a little bit funny by the end. What can I do about it other than just move on past it? Or try and explain it and then dig myself a deeper hole. Some of these tube sections are a bit shorter than the others. Try and look ahead and level those out. Looks like something's moving along that rail, but I suppose that goes into the viewing things from a distance. Graphics look kinda shoddy very far off, but that's for the best. Playing with limited graphic settings. Thought I almost fell off into that. I wouldn't have placed it otherwise, but kind of a bad blip there. Is this the same spot as before? Wonder how I keep doing it in the same area. Probably lays to how bad I am at placing consistently in the same spot. That seemed to be extra wide, so maybe that's one way I could work on widening it. That might be a more natural approach, though that is a fair bit slower to what I'd like to do, but obviously the alternative being place foundation, climbing to the sky as a sort of scaffold, and place it as close to. Can also sometimes get weird angles with foundation when placing with other foundation, but it doesn't seem like I can use foundation on the tubes, which would actually be a very nice answer if I could place it tangential or approximately tangential. Am I sitting on a dip? I might be, because it looks different here than I did a moment ago. I can't seem to place exactly where I want to, right on that dark control panel or outlet. It looks like some control panels on it, some vents as well. Definitely an interesting concept to think of, a tube that humans could travel through unimpeded by physics, like the game, is too much to ask, but the logistics of in real life are quite something. Visually in this game, it creates an air bubble, a visual air bubble around your character, and in some scientific and or fantasy / science fiction sense, it's a good solution to it. Something that generates a bubble cushion of air, or possibly something of a tangible material that would protect you while traveling through hypertubes or travel tubes, if that is a thing in the future. Of course, the human body can only tolerate so much, so even with a significant amount of cushioning, it just might not be a feasible idea, but it's still great to think of if we can overcome limitations in the human body being able to withstand high speeds, sharp turns, and not be bashed against the walls constantly. So if I focus up more on placing perfectly on the outermost edge, which hopefully doesn't slow me down too much, that might just be the widening factor needed, although it seems to be easier now that there's a semi-decent walking distance between each foundation, so that if I do a split, that will become difficult again. But that might just be the nice touch to widening this out. If not, would be the foundation scaffold. Bring that up, get it as close as possible, and then do the mathematical approach of, say I've gone 100 times around, then I implement the first major and distinct widening element. For one level, I place it, let's say this is at a 30 might be generous, but 30-degree angle from not directly above, but from the vertical, 30 degrees off. Each of these placements creating a 30-degree. I'll have to take a protractor or the like to a still of the tube tornado while standing atop the sky bridge. Not a very fancy sky bridge, but a sky bridge nonetheless, which apparently I'm rapidly approaching, unless that's probably just a partial optical illusion. Things going off in the distance, narrowing out, could give me a decent oh, my hand disappears. 3D representation of what I'm seeing. Same thing with the space elevator, it narrows out by the end. Really need to remember to level these dips out. And so do a mathematical setup where I instead make the next placement either 30 degrees to the horizon. 45 might be ideal, but also ballparking any of these numbers, or if I go even wider, do that for one loop around, then it created a nice segment. Do one lap around with that. Do one lap around as I have been so far, totaling 2 laps. Then back to the other style of a severe angle. Do that for possibly 2. Seemingly difficult. Maybe I need to find a visual cue for where I should be placing, if the hammer should be like right on the black thing. Of course it varies per spot because I'm dealing with a different visual each time. Do that for 2, then do the normal for 2, for a total of 6. Gonna put commentary on pause for a moment. Enjoy some of the aesthetic, if you will. Alright, I suppose I use that as a test of sorts to see if I could improve, combining words, improve my production or my pace at placing. And I didn't notice a significant increase and or decrease, maybe a slight decrease in my own perception at least of my pace of placing tubes. And as I was giving out the math for the 1 to 1 and 2 to 2, obviously that would lead to 3 to 3 and so on. Though I picture that is actually more of a jagged view, so I think it should be more of a exponential curve. So I'm picturing a better approach, which might revolve around a strict math visual. Something like when I hit a certain height, I'll go 10 at the normal, then 1 at the steep, or more steep horizontal. That's obviously the wrong way of representing it. It should be more steep versus less steep. So less steep if I've been following the more steep approach. And so if mathematically I aim for 10 to 1, then 9 to 2, and 7 to 3, eventually evening it out, although that would be a 5 to 5 at one point, which might, in this mathematical sense and to make it look more appealing, it should be a 1 to 1 for the range between 4 and 6 and 5 and 5. And then eventually continue that out so that it created a elliptical curve. But I'm also realizing as I'm describing this, the challenge it introduces. It will create a pretty sizable tedium, if anything, to a challenge. That the more I try to flatten out the top of the Tubenado, the more work that it will take in accomplishing that. I don't have a clear visual of what that would look like time-wise, or my own mental sanity. I'm definitely picturing that it might be something I give up on pretty quickly, but I do still like the notion of it. It might have to be something I approach after a few more hours of gaining height. Because it's definitely a problem that I've already hit the extremes of widening with this method. Maybe I'll find some way to experiment with something other than foundation, because if I chose to do that technique with foundation, it would be quite a anti-treat, quite a monotonous and burdening task to try and accomplish, because I'm picturing each level that needs to be done requires so many. If I try to tie it to computers, so many extra variables you have to account for. There's that word again, variables. And elements you need to introduce. Something along the lines of, if the first one takes 100 foundation of finicky placement, then it will be, for the second one, after it's risen those 9, if I had already done the 10, the next 9 rungs to then approach it next, it will require easily 150, maybe 200, maybe more of an exponential value, 300 of wonky foundation placement to try and find what I like to work with. And then, since that would be a 10 to 1, then 9 to 2, after the 9 would be 2 attempts, which means a secondary finagling of foundation less than a total foundation's height higher than where I was just working, which will be essentially the same value, if not a couple dozen more foundation blocks, just to give it a generous representation of what's being worked with, along with the fact of dealing with only having gone up a level, which also doesn't take into account for the initial attempt, or any of the attempts, if it's possible to line up, or if I first attempt succeed in getting the foundation to become level with where I was working at. And if it's only like a barely noticeable gap difference, don't know if that's too much for me. Like that as an example. If that will be pleasing enough from a distance that I'll be fine with that as the option. But if you catch where I'm going with this, it's a exponential problem of seemingly infinite more attempts at getting just the right twist or turn. Say, since the foundations only work with 8 degrees, when the block foundations work with 8 the 8 orthogonal directions in placing foundation, and only 2 for uniqueness when placing structures, or 4 if you're removing or adding uniqueness. That's another one of the do I know what I'm saying? If I'm saying it well at all, kind of conundrums I have. That working with the foundation, if I am only ever placing in those 8 orthogonal directions, and yet I'm placing easily 30, 40, almost 50 at this level, and so much higher later on. In fact, if I'm about to do a split, which is seeming to be a nice call here soon, a split in foundation placement, or 2 foundations. I'm going to raise this 1 degree, see if that makes this level out better. I think so, although that did seem to have an incline there. Not too bad. That means with the capability of placing foundation at a greater degree of forgiveness and placement, I'm trying to tack on extra words to make it sound more impressive, which the more I talk, the worse and less impressive it sounds, while I'm trying to spout this all out, trying to keep up the train of thought. The more work it will take if I have to make extra adjustments, more foundation as scaffolding, where if I take the task from the grand picture to the simple picture that it is, that I'm just trying to create a Tubenado, and that regardless of the end result, if I can find, or the path along the journey, the path taken along the journey, or the path chosen, excuse me, that I can just simply be satisfied with the end result, whether it has that highly mathematical approach that took this from a minimum 10-hour project, maximum 15, 20, as a ballpark for my assumption of how far I want to get to and how long I expect it to take, to easily hundreds upon hundreds of hours trying to get the right angle, the right touch, the right smoothness, which for the most part I can scratch that out with how forgiving tubes are for themselves. If I eventually start placing on themselves again, then it'll even itself out. Then maybe not too bad, at least visually in the end, and obviously from a distance. I wonder if I'll try to create a ramp back up to the top. Although that will be extra foundation placement from there that I'd essentially be removing. So I think the launch is still pretty good. Or as a more forgiving feature, and the alternative that I said I would do, still as a high likelihood, is the smooth tube ride up somewhere traveling on the inside of this. Since these are forgiving at being able to place on overlapping parts. Say it's a fast pass at Disneyland, and that the tube itself is the standard line. So looking at that from an exponential value is a very egregious thought. So, as I've been talking myself through this, I've mostly come to terms with and realized I probably will not do the highly mathematical thing. Still like to look at options. If I discover anything that's an amazing game changer, I will definitely, obviously, share it, because I'd also be doing it, of some way to widen this out. I intended to start doing a split at the space elevator. So, like anything about life and missed opportunities, you can always find another opportunity to do it over again. So, I'll try and do it at the next turnaround. A couple times here I've fallen off and had to get back on, so even with this length I'm struggling, so I'm worried that at the foundation split, if I'll be struggling with the Blade Runners again. Because so far they've been quite convenient. I've always thought about mapping out the path of the Sky Manta Ray. So you know what? I'm gonna pause that timer again, give you a note of 2 hours, 6 minutes, and 11 seconds, while I add another thing I'd like to possibly do in the future, which is Manta Ray Path with tubes, question mark, belts, question mark as well, but that's a kind of a flat question mark. All of a sudden, when I look back, unless my eyes are playing a trick on me, it seems more deserty. I wonder if it was because it was focusing off in the distance or because we've reached a certain height. But doing it with tubes is ideal compared to belts, because tubes, you go exactly where the tubes go, but with belts you are bound by the, I guess, in a logarithmic sense, dealing with exponentials and values attributed to physics of the game. Using belts, you constantly run into the edge, and that you have to compensate by stepping back on and readjusting your place constantly. And so belts, although a nice idea and might be perfect for getting the tubes right, because it's possible that belts are easier to place than tubes. Although some difficulty in where it would be traveling along. Actually that's getting me to realize, alright, I will start doing a split here. Which might look funky for quite a while. Looks like it, in some of these spots, it might have to be a bit long or inconsistent with the length. So it took many passes to finally level out. I guess I can kind of see it right there, if that's supposedly about the length, if not quite a height, so maybe it will be, obviously, where I am. Oh, that was a misplacement. Obviously it's a double from where I started to, hopefully that fixes itself out later too, to where I got to now, if I'm looking at it correctly. If not, I waited a little bit long here. But speaking in exponentials, the next time that I'll do a split would be at not as a significant change. If I'd gone twice the height before doing the change, then I'll have only gone 2/3 the height. Having a hard time representing this visually in my head and obviously verbally. Also doesn't help when I have to compensate for falling off. Maybe I should be placing more on top to keep up the rounding part, because I do seem to keep dipping back in a little. Yep, Blade Runners are definitely moving me pretty fast. But hopefully I got the idea across well, that the next time I would do a split, I'll have gone an equivalent distance, say 50 tube heights more. But at that point, I'll have hit 150. And it won't be as a significant change. That definitely adds to an element of life. Getting very tangential here and not sticking to the same subjects. That with all things that we experience in life, that we definitely lose its luster, its enjoyment, the more we do it. So, of course, I'm not of a double negative, double standard element. I knew this spot was going to be funny, so I'm just placing them approximate distance from each other, just a little bit longer than the tube length is, trying to level out some lengths here. That the more you do something, the less of a euphoric experience you get from it. And it looks like we've come back around. Can definitely see it right here. It looks very brief in the changes. And of all things that I could have been trying, counting out how many times I've gone around, that might have been too much to ask for my poor little brain while doing this project. And I guess I misspoke earlier. It seems to be easier for me to find and place on top of some outermost extreme. Alright, I'm gonna step back and fix this, because I definitely don't like that. Although it would be a nice blip if it's on the back side, then it would never be seen. But I'm more a stickler for symmetry. But I seem to be having an easier time seeing, if not placing it as close to the black spot on the foundations, the vent holes. And once again, I do believe I've lost track of what I was saying, so I can use that as an opportunity to either finish some other thoughts or find a new subject. So on the element of exponential, logarithmic, yes, now I recall. It was a little bit of the belt tube placement. There's one nice part about the belt part, is that there's 5 speed values that are deterministic, while the tubes are affected by gravity, so would have one maintained speed, slightly slower than as if going, at least in the Tubenado sense, slightly. So I don't know about slightly slower, if I can at least maintain flat ground, but I don't believe I would if I were to use tubes trying to path the sky manta ray's path to travel alongside it, or with it, or inside of it if I got this structure high enough. Which I do recall, it also varies in its height flight path. And so that makes the tube principle even more less desirable. Speaking in a sense of increasing as a positive integer with parentheses and then negative on the inside, more math. It would be less enjoyable of a task if I find myself trying to do tubes, and also less enjoyable of a ride as speeds would vary and probably not match with the tube option, wherein the belt would probably get close enough. If anything, walking could compensate. Looks like I actually ran out of foundations, so I'm gonna pause that timer. And did I just bump into it? I don't think I want to bump into it again in case it does damage. Nice touchdown. That might have been too much concrete. It's also not. Walking side to side with Blade Runners doesn't increase your movement speed. I'll also take this opportunity to restock on these since they were sort of low. Hard to look at that number when it's not even, but I can live. With any inconsistencies. And I also intended on topping off like this, although I'm worried I grabbed an uneven amount. So, as it is clearly not a hassle, I will burn one of those stacks. And might as well fill it with plates. And this box is now empty, so more work for myself. This is a nice approach here, walking straight towards the planets at a 45-degree angle. Makes it look like I'm heading straight towards them. Apologies if I seem more loose about this commentary dialogue than one would find interesting. I just realized that if I do this method, it'll be a spoiler for how tall it is. Also a good opportunity to save. It's always beneficial. So I'm going to avoid looking at the Tubenado while... Yep, that caught a quick glimpse. My apologies. Spoiler alert. Looks like I just flew over a crate. I wonder why there's a crate there. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too much of a giveaway for... That would have sucked if I went flying past and had to overcompensate. But then there's always scum saving. Trying to keep the visual representation of the tornado a secret until the beginning of every video. Whether that's something worth sharing in the video as I just did or not. I've shared it, and what's done is done. Not that it's a major inclination of how my mind works, but the idea being you can at least get a little bit inside my head of what I'm trying to accomplish at any stage of this project, this task. What I envision as the end goal. And again, to use similar repetitive words, I'm deeply pleased, satisfied with what small glimpse of the tornado I saw. Still haven't gone as high as that launch point. So that'll be good, at least for a little bit. That was interesting what I just saw. Briefly, I'm apparently clipping with some markers behind me at some points because I saw something that said independent power source, which is Let's zoom in on the map here and point it out right there. And yet I saw it while facing this way, so that's kind of a bug, kind of a bummer for things that you'd like to see fleshed out about this game, but also I noticed it once in, if you also saw save times in this game, which there's a handful of hours more to this game that I've played that have been lost to scum saving or updates that have deleted files. Sad, but understandable. That the first time I look at the map in essentially 200 plus hours and found something that I didn't like that I saw, that is instantly a forgivable blip. It's so trivial that I kind of regret even delving into it. I'm sorry, please don't revoke my access to this game, Coffee Stain Studios. I like it too much. I'm no troubleshooter, but maybe I can help. Maybe I can make a bargain with you. Not asking for compensation, just the chance to play the game. I don't want it to go away. Trying to sound coy. Kinda childish, doesn't really sound right in my head. That seems to be too tall of a adjustment. I think that is based off of how short the tube segments are. So I'll have to do the less favorable thing and place it higher on, deal with some more straight points for a little bit. Hopefully after 20 rounds that it'll be more forgiving to do adjustments. I know I didn't make it perfect, though it doesn't seem too bad. Across the way, that seems kind of rough. You can see that hiccup, but that looks like it straightened it out. So I'm confident that what I'm accomplishing with those adjustments is at least making a pleasing change. It seems to be a bit longer than some other spots. All red does not seem ideal. I wonder what's causing that. Oh, I was probably standing too close to it. So if I'm really gonna complain about what the game does, why can't we place things while we're inside of it? Understandable that creating an entity in creating a permanent entity with the player in the way is a difficult thing to work with. I wonder why I'm placing in the middle of all these spots. Let's try and, I guess, extend it to start matching back up. That'll sort of speed up the point where I'll stop having to place as many foundations per square inch. If I cut out one, and that the only time the player character is able to clip through, once again, I think I'm just trying to elongate it. I also think I could have done better to not be placing on top of the foundation, but also it's been a pretty good guideline. I'm definitely feeling a bit of a reach now, at least in some spots, or just because I was too far out. That the only time the player character clips through anything is when it's in tubes or trains, which is a fun little quirk. Honestly, I'm pretty content with how that works so far. The only challenge I was hinting at was if you're able to place structures where you're standing, if then you'd be able to just walk out from where it is, from where you are, inside of the structure, and that you wouldn't be able to walk right back in because you stepped entirely out, but that you are able to traverse through it seamlessly until you finally exit it. You're already able to do that while clipping through rocks and the like. If you jump out of a train while it was inside of a wall. It definitely seems like progress is slowed a bit if I have to place so many extra segments per round. So that is a slight hamper on progress, but I think that's a fair trade for what the work level requires of me. So while I rack my brain for what I was initially talking about easily 3 or 4 topics ago that I deemed very important compared to minute ramblings about tube and structure placements, suppose I can work back through things one at a time. I talked about trying to create a path along the manta ray. That's a fun idea, although aesthetically it doesn't seem as great of a accomplishment compared to the Tube-nado, which, although simple in its design, is also very long in its task and process and requirement. And that actually leads into a decent segue that I find always an enjoyable topic, is doing repetitive tasks in a grinding sense for a video game and finding enjoyment in that. I originally thought that that was one of the more annoying and less desirable traits to a game when I was, say, 8 or 9. Best example would be playing a game, an RPG with a leveling based system that I always felt horribly tedious to try and get to the end game with the appropriate amount of levels needed to beat the game. But then after growing older and finding more unique ways to play games, unique games and game styles, and of course ways to play games as I'm doing right here right now, that you find enjoyment in the variable ways you play a game. There's that word again, variable. Maybe I should make a variable tally mark. And that was definitely not the moment to try and take my hand off the keyboard. So once again, on my slip of paper right next to me, variable tallies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. An assumption of it being 5. Looks like we slipped through nighttime. Kind of get a sunrise right now. Let's put a pause on that timer. Wish not to lose too much time for productivity, but it's a nice opportunity to look at the orange sunrise. Makes me wonder the difference between, and of course it's rapidly losing color, so my apologies for missing that. So makes me wonder how much visual difference you get from a sunrise versus a sunset. If you still get the same orange hues or colors. Obviously it gets very purplish at dusk. Do we also get that purple at dawn if we're looking for it the right way, or am I viewing it from my own my own environment, mountain ranges around me covering up the sun's ascent or descent? Just a brief pause there. because it rapidly changed in light and satisfied with that sunrise. Because one thing I listened to recently was listening to a podcast, listened to someone's story about their filming of a commercial, that they used the sunrise to create the setting for a sunset when they couldn't easily access the sunset at the time off of a cruise ship. So I don't know if that's easily if that is an easily interchangeable world phenomena, for lack of clarity on the subject, but trying to maintain some eloquence with what I'm saying. Before I get right back to the topic of enjoying the grind in a video game, I will offer some transparency in that I have not been the most perfect, best at maintaining the timer, if y'all would forgive me. I try and compensate for when I realize that I hadn't been running it with running it when I'm restocking, so unfortunately times are going to be off. Somebody better at keeping time and not as distracted as I am with multitasking would probably be able to keep a better track of how long things are. But that also leads into a question I've been mulling over: if I personally would find more significance in the timer being based off of the video itself and the time spent on the project, but the timestamp created with making the video is a better representation of the totality of the project. Keep placing interesting tube segment links. Hopefully that isn't too bad. Looks like I'm gonna try and skip one here too. That the menial tasks in the project are what make the project, the big picture, its best form, its best look. And so rather than directly timing how long I'm placing each segment, also with the variability and like how long it takes to place a segment versus now versus when I'm working with greater lengths. Can see I've gone about 6 or 7 levels since that point. Oh, how time flies. That the full length should be valued at the videos. Not saying I'm trying to be lazy here, but that on principle it's more aesthetic or more just to what I'm trying to accomplish, just in the law sense, I suppose. That I'm doing the right thing. To give it a simple answer. And then to quickly wrap up the topic of the grind, that I've actually turned around and found that long time-consuming tasks, although of course to an extent, because I'm not picturing myself doing the hypermath setup just yet. Maybe once I get a better picture of what I'm working with, or if it actually isn't too bad, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Keep overstepping just a little, trusting that the foundation I'm aiming for the foundation well, but as you can see, I'm quite close to the edge. That time I stepped too far, too fast, too soon. That it's actually a, if anything, cathartic or mesmerizing or pleasing sensation to enjoy the long leveling sessions, fill that with background music or put something else on like a video or a podcast while you do the long and slow menial task. And so if I'm adding commentary to that list, then I think I'm doing one of my most favorite things, and I'm finding this much more and more enjoyable, even if it seems to be becoming more tedious or more ridiculous. I am very happy to see that distance. It looks like it's also hit a visual threshold. I can't see the foundation parts across the way anymore. I think I'll try and get this next to the space elevator and then call it for a video and use this brief moment to wrap up after hitting an hour already so far. I found it a very effective and enjoyable video. That the grind is part of the enjoyment. The task itself, trying to find satisfaction in the little things that you do. Maybe some other elements of all the small parts make up the big picture. So all the small foundations that I will be removing later, also being removed from the big picture, makes the big picture even better. Almost there. And all in all, just having a good time. Hopefully, if you stumble across this video, hopefully you enjoy it as well. Maybe give you inspiration to find your own grind in a game. Yep, this is a good spot, so I'll pause that timer. 2 hours, 27 minutes, if anyone's curious. And so, find that game you like. Find a way to make it extra fun or play in your own style. Add your own twist. Or just, I suppose, play the game again. Always fun to go back or improve your experience or continue your experience with something. Guess that's not where I meant to end that note, but still fine to throw it in there. But I'm going to end this video here. Thank you all for watching, and see you all in the next one.